This episode is brought to you by the Enneagram 5 community. Join our free community to get early access to episodes, attend live community events, and meet other Enneagram 5s like you. Visit the link in the description to learn more. We'll see you over there.
Okay, Cody, what's one question you've always wanted to ask me about being a dad?
Was it worth it?
My name is, and I'm an Enneagram Five.
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 I already know the answer, but you know.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Not to discount how difficult it is.
Yeah. The sacrifices.
Especially as a 5. But yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So when was the moment? Did you always think you were going to be a dad?
This is a great story. I don't know if I've actually told you this whole story or not.
I don't think so.
Okay, so I will answer that question, but of course I have to tell a story first.
Right.
Right.
You
So
have to lead up to it.
So this was October 2015, and we had just gotten back from a trip with Amy's family, and it was my birthday month. So my birthday is in October, and you know how Amy is. She's a 4, so she likes to celebrate
Everything.
and make everything special. And she used to, not as much anymore because we have kids and it's a little more difficult, but she used to take birthdays and try to spread them out across the month.
Okay.
And so I just going back to work for the first day. And so I was just kind of out of it after being on vacation for a week. And she had me come and sit down on the couch and asked me to close my eyes and said she had an early birthday present for me. And I was like, oh, okay. So I held out my hands and she put something in my hands and it was all wrapped up. And I opened it, and it was a pair of slippers or house shoes, depending on where you're from, right? So, and I thought this is a really thoughtful gift because I work from home, my feet get cold, and so I started feeling around the outside. I'm like, oh, micro suede, and feeling the inside, and like, oh, this is a nice lining. And I go to put my hand in, and my hand can't go all the way into the slipper. I'm like, what is going on? And so I realize there's something in there, and I reach in and I pull it out. That doesn't make any sense. And then I look in the other one and reach in and pull that out, and I'm sitting here staring at this pair of baby slippers. And it was in that moment, like, it clicked. Yeah. Like, you're telling me that I'm going to be a dad. And of course, I'm like, are you serious? And and she gives me a hug. And when she could no longer see my face, it was in that moment for the first time that I realized beyond a shadow of a doubt that I never wanted kids.
I think that the absolute worst part of being a 5 parent was that there was no downtime. I remember feeling lost and not really knowing who I was for a very long time. The best part about being a 5 parent was watching my kids grow and discover and become, because even now, as they are adults, they are fantastic people. And I know that my 5-ness helped me allow them to discover who they were and to become the people they are today.
The funny thing is, I didn't know this, but she was secretly recording this whole thing. So there's footage of my face just like going white as a sheet and like
I want to see this.
Complete dread in my face.
We've been friends long enough. I think I've earned the right to see this.
Got to find it.
I want to see this video just so that I can be more terrified.
So here's the thing. It wasn't that I was like vehemently opposed to having kids.
Right.
It was just that I had never really seriously considered it before. And in that moment, I realized that it was never part of my vision for the future. When I thought about the future, it never included kids. And so I went through this really painful and long process of digging into why that was. And there was this whole awkward moment of a few months where I knew something was up. Amy knew that, something was up. And I knew that Amy knew. And like, we both knew, but neither of us was talking about it.
Yeah.
And she did a great job of giving me some space and letting me work through it. And thankfully I was in therapy at the time, so that helped a lot.
Yeah, you had somewhere to sounding board.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So I unpacked all of that. And a big portion of it was just how I grew up, and I didn't have the best relationship with my parents growing up, and I always kind of felt more like a burden than a joy. And so it was really difficult for me to see or to think of being a parent as being anything other than a burden. But it was also because I'm a 5. Yeah. And so our big thing is energy management, and looking at parenting from the outside looks batshit crazy. And why would anyone do that? Especially for people who aren't naturally emotional and empathetic and all of those things. It's like, it makes no sense. Why would anyone put themselves through that?
Right.
And so I couldn't get past that. It did not compute how it was going to be okay.
Yeah.
And so I spent a few months really struggling with that. And I came through on the other side really. That process actually is what made me question everything.
Okay.
Because it started to get me to unpack my childhood, and which made me unpack everything that I grew up believing. And that's what really started that journey for me. But this part of it, I was able to work through in a few months. And by the time we went to the first ultrasound, where I could see like his spine moving and the beginnings of his face and stuff like that, like I was all in.
Right.
And I was, all in. Like I was Amy's birth coach, and we were going to birthing classes, and I was like learning everything. And I probably knew more about like her upcoming breast milk, details than she.
Right. Yeah.
I nerded out on all this stuff because it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
It's really, really
You
fascinating.
guys brought me into that on that process too. So I got to learn all about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And just the number of things that like transformations that the female body has to go through in order to just give birth is insane. And then everything after that too, like the hormones at birth that within just a couple of minutes, establish this lifelong bond between mother and child. And it's crazy. So
yeah,
that, and then that experience of being there at birth, so close to it, was also really life-changing, except something happened that took me a long time to get over.
Okay.
I was really upset about it actually for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
So we were laboring for like 13 hours. I say we, but obviously Amy was doing all the hard work. I was
along
there
for the ride.
I was there. I mean, I did, man. It was involved because we didn't go kind of the traditional route. We went more the natural route, and it was like she had really, really bad back labor. And so it was, and like her contractions were like 2 or 3 minutes apart from the beginning, and they just grew in intensity.
Yeah.
And so it was like 13 hours of every couple of minutes, someone like taking an axe and splitting your back at the same time, just like electrocuting your abdomen. And so we were doing these different positions to try to help. And actually we did different positions in the beginning, mainly to actually make it worse so that we can move the process along faster.
Yeah. Sounds like it really worked.
Yeah. It did.
I guess it could have been 23 hours.
It did. Yeah, it did. Because when we first got to this is way more birth stuff than I anticipated going into for this episode, but that's fine. Mm-hmm. When we first got there, she was 1 centimeter, and we were like 45 minutes outside Nashville. And we had to drive all the way in at 1 o'clock in the morning. Like, we're not going back. So yeah, we're just going to have to be here and do it. And within a few hours, she had gone up to 6 because of all of the like intense stuff that we did in that time period. But I was with her, like,
was it like birthing yoga? What kind of just positions?
Man, I'm trying to remember like all the There are different things you can do with a birthing ball. There's like this, I don't know if it's like a Pilates ladder or something where you hold on and then you have this, I think they call it rebosa or something. It's like this cloth. And so I would hold the cloth around her belly just to give it support while she just stretched and bent over. And then we would like just different positions that's like one is her like up on one knee to try to just nudge things along. Yeah. It was all a blur. So I don't remember a lot of the details, but the one thing that I loved about it though, as intense as it was that it was just this really primal experience. And I was in there with it, and it was hours and hours of just being there in that moment. And as you know, for a 5, that's kind of hard to achieve. And I was really grateful for it because I'm like, I'm going to be here in the moment when my son is born.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that happened was we had the GoPro. We were borrowing one from my brother, and I hadn't tested it or really had a chance to figure out how it worked. And so when it was time to actually deliver, I went to turn it on and the battery was dead and I didn't have a plug for it. So then I tried to just prop up my phone.
Yeah.
And then one of the like nurse assistant was kind of just had a really bad attitude. And I think she thought that I cared more about that than helping my wife.
Yeah.
But I was doing it because Amy asked me to do it.
Right.
And she, like, in the middle of us starting to push, she just brings my phone to me. But I couldn't move, so I knew that I wasn't capturing. And it completely pulled me out of that moment.
Right.
And I was so pissed.
Well, yeah.
I was so upset. And now I look back on it, it doesn't bother me at all because I've been through a couple since then.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
But it was... I hadn't really experienced anything quite like that as a 5, being so connected to the moment and to my body and to her body and to just the whole experience. It sounds really cheesy, but it really was like a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
And despite the end, I'm really grateful that I was able to go through that with her in the same way. The other 2 births weren't nearly as intense. And so it was
not
crazy.
in that way, I guess.
Well, yeah, they have their own kind of.
Yeah, they have their own. I was there for the 3rd one. It was pretty intense.
Having a baby in a pandemic, man.
In an apartment.
Oh my God.
In an apartment. I wish more than anything we could have seen your neighbors' faces.
Oh yeah.
Because like they knew what was happening. They had
They would have had to, unless they just weren't there.
That's true.
It was the middle of the day. It was like,
but it was on a weekend.
It was a Friday.
Was it? Oh, it was a Friday.
Yeah.
How was I there?
You just got back from vacation.
Oh, that's what it was.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because we waited.
You did. You waited until we got back.
Because you were the only one that could help us with childcare. Because Amy's dad, when Amy's dad got COVID, 2 days before we were due. And so her whole family had to go into lockdown. And then you guys ended up going out of town the day before we were due. And then we went into, she started having contractions that day that you went out of town. We're like, oh no.
No, she wasn't due until like that Tuesday. And we went out of town on Friday, I thought.
No, you went out of town on a Sunday.
Yeah.
I remember this very clearly.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So Bruce got COVID on Saturday.
Yeah.
You went out of town on Sunday, and we were planning to go to the birth center, and you went out of town, and then immediately she started having contractions, and we're like, we have to prep to have this baby here.
Yeah.
And so we went through all the stuff and worked with the midwife to get our place ready and it ended up being false labor. And then I think Amy's body was just like, I'm holding out. And because you guys came back Thursday night, she's like, I'm holding out. And then like Friday morning, we went into real labor.
Well, to be fair, I need to put this out into the world so that everybody doesn't think I'm a shitty friend. So like, we said when you started having contractions, if we need to come back, we will absolutely come back. Just tell us and we will turn around. And so we were in kind of like constant on call mode, ready to we kind of left everything packed up. Like we were ready to just immediately leave and come back.
No, I mean, it ended up working out perfectly. Like that was by far the best birth experience for everyone involved. But leading up to that, just the anxiety of not knowing what was going to happen, having a baby in a pandemic was
right. Yeah, the pandemic anxiety is very real for everyone. Okay, so that's interesting. So I think So you never really had before that moment, the slippers moment, and having to come to grips with it. You never really thought about whether or not you wanted kids or not.
Not in any kind of serious way. Like I would kind of think about. I would ask myself if I wanted kids, and then I think would just end up distracting myself to like not really answer the question.
Okay.
But if I got anywhere near an answer, it was no, I didn't really want kids.
Right.
And the funny thing is, like, I can understand why I didn't want kids. And I'm like, dude, you would have been okay without kids.
Yeah.
But I'm a completely different person, and a lot of that has to do with the journey that I went on with becoming a dad. And so, that, like, I've grown, there's so much growth that can happen if you lean into being a parent. And I experienced that in a very, very real way. And so on the other side of it, yeah, I would have been fine not having any kids. And also I'm really, really glad that I did. So
in I think one of the questions that any five would ask, and is a question I'm going to ask, is do you feel that you still get even remotely adequate space and time to yourself?
I've had to adjust what adequate means.
Sure. Okay.
I will say that Amy's been, especially as we've learned about the Enneagram and she's learned more about me and what it means to be a 5, she's been great about giving me the space when possible. And like when she can tell that I'm just getting overwhelmed, she'll just be like, hey, go sit down and have some coffee for an hour or something like that.
Yeah.
And or 30 minutes. And just, it gives me enough where I can do a reset.
Right.
And then I'm ready to re-engage. So, but on the flip side, it's also a really great limiter to keep me from going too far down that path, too far on the other way of just like all alone time, isolating, like getting in my own head.
Yeah.
All of that. So it's definitely challenging. That's one of the more challenging parts of being a parent as a 5 is that you don't have the same time and energy to
do anything
process, be alone.
Yeah.
All of that. It's especially, and I think it's really important to note that I am still in the early stages.
Right.
Because I have 3 boys under 5. So 4 years, 2 years, and almost 5 months now. And so it's still in a very, very intense stage. I'm told it gets a little less chaotic maybe, or a little easier as they get older and more self-sufficient. But
yeah,
right now it's still very much, there's always someone demanding attention, and usually multiples of them at the same time.
I am not a mom, but as a 5, I have completely mixed feelings about it. I've always thought about how I would be terrified of having a baby and them needing me all the time and me not getting enough of my rest time that I so desperately need. I definitely need my own alone recharge time. And I just imagine being completely exhausted and not being my healthiest, most fruitful self. But then I simultaneously believe I would be great at it. Once they got to that age where they could talk to me and communicate with me, I love teaching, and I've done it before. I've taught kids of many ages, and I always found that I gravitated to those older children, especially those kids that a lot of people call the difficult age. I love that age, those middle schoolers, junior hires, and they have their own strong opinions. And oh boy, that's my favorite, because I feel like they're also so curious and so teachable, and I like to ask prompting questions and just explore that with them and explore their growing and their learning, and watching it happening is so exciting. So I just see it as something that would be such a challenge for me, but I feel like I could also be really good at it. And I look at other 5s and I just wonder how they do it, and it's encouraging. I think it definitely can be done, and I know plenty of really good 5 parents.
So that kind of brings me to my next question, which is, did having a child just create such a intense, euphoric, and disillusioning experience for you that you thought having a second and a third one was a good idea?
Oh, I honestly...
Or is it kind of like how I think about my dog Sam and how he'd be so much happier with a friend? You know?
So I'm just going to go ahead and say that the first two weren't exactly planned. They weren't not planned, but they weren't planned.
If I remember correctly, you removed the goalie. You just weren't necessarily trying to score.
That's a good way to put it. Sure.
Yeah.
The third one was more planned.
Yeah.
I will say that. And we knew going into it that it was going to be our last one. And it was good to have that closure and sort of have that, because it was always a question. Even before we started having kids, like we were married, I think we were married 5 years when we got pregnant. And it was always this sort of in the background. Is this going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And so there was always this anxiety around it, to where once we did, it alleviated a lot of that. It alleviated a lot of pressure for us to sort of make that decision, because it was made for us, kind of.
Right.
And so, and the same thing happened with our last, where we knew this was going to be, like, we were done at 3, and there's just so much less pressure on, we know we're not going to have any more, and we're completely content with that. And so that helps. Now, I think that I'm trying to put myself back where I was when we had our second. I think what had happened there was that there was that question of, do we want our kid to grow up being an only child?
Yeah.
And we both had siblings growing up, and
more than one sibling. I feel like, which is, I think that's a side question that I was just thinking about, was, do you think that also had an influence or played a part in wanting more than 2, you know?
I would have actually been content with 1.
Yeah.
And I would have been content with 2. And
now you're content with 3.
Right. Well, no, I told Amy, I said, if our second one had been a girl, I would have just been done.
Yeah.
I think we were.
Why is that, though?
Just because I wanted to experience having a girl.
Sure.
This is nothing.
So you were rolling the dice the third time to see if you could get a girl. After that, you're like, okay, really no more this time.
Yeah. I mean, I had a feeling we were going to end up with 3 boys for some reason, but I wanted to, I don't know, I was just curious what it would be like, and be able to see, like, what are the differences, and what's the same, and
Sure.
All of that stuff. And so
you ride one roller coaster. Gotta see what the others are like.
So I think that I was okay. So because I had so many siblings, so I have 2 brothers, 2 sisters, and I love them. None of us really got along growing up. We were all spaced out pretty far.
I was going to say,
like,
you're pretty far apart.
And I was particularly difficult to get along with growing up. So at least as far as my siblings are concerned,
I can't see that at all.
Oh no.
Yeah.
And so I think that sort of played into me not really caring to have a big family. And Amy, on the other side, she has 2 siblings, and they grew up and they were all really close. And then I think when she was younger, she envisioned herself having like 10 kids or something like that. Like, it's so completely.
Well, she's definitely got the amount of love to give to 10 children. That's for sure.
So I think it wasn't like, hey, this is, our lives are so beautiful and colorful and vibrant that we just want to exponentially grow that. Even though there's so much joy that came from being a parent, it's incredibly challenging, and there's a little bit of craziness, I think, that has to be there in order to continue going.
Yeah.
Because there's part of you that's the devil, I know, at least, but you're always rolling the dice, because each kid can be so different, and you don't know how the 2 kids are going to get along. Like, our first 2 have been at odds since the day the second one was born, and they're just starting to build a better relationship as the second one is growing up and being able to, one, fend for himself. And he's so funny because he's such, like, just a jolly, happy little guy.
He is,
but
literally the happiest little child I've
but
ever met.
He will throw down.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how my brother was. Yeah.
And so it's just because he's had to learn how to defend himself.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah. I think to answer your original question, there wasn't a lot of conscious thought going into it. It was a lot of, we don't necessarily want our first to be an only child, so we'll just kind of let it happen. And then
It had to have been, you just said the third one was planned though. So there was conscious thought.
That's a whole other story, I think. But there was a moment where we were down at Coolidge Park or Renaissance Park. You know that like big concrete circle thing with the grass in the middle?
Yeah.
They were playing. The two of them were playing, and it was really like the first time they were really playing together. And we were just sort of watching them. And I said to Amy, I said, I could have a third. And she was like, really? I was like, yeah, why not? And then I think like 3 months later we were pregnant. So
it was like, that was the end of that talk. She's like, okay, well, no more birth control for me. There's like no talk about it.
yeah. So kind of, if we can kind of go back to that original, so becoming a dad, there's a lot there that I'm sure you're curious about and want to unpack, because I feel like there's a couple of like unique challenges as a 5 with being a dad.
Yeah.
Parenting in its own is just insane.
Yeah.
No matter what Enneagram type you are.
Mm-hmm.
But,
yeah.
And each one, I'm sure, comes with its own unique challenges. So I can really only speak to being a 5. But going back to the energy management thing, that's a constant struggle. And where there's this internal conflict all the time of my kids want my attention. I love them. I love them more than anything. And they want me to play with them, and they want me to teach them things, and they want me to read them books and all this stuff. And every time I'm presented with that option of, do I say yes or do I say no? There's this internal calculation of how much energy is going to be required and how much do I have? And then what's the kind of reward for both parties on the outside, like on the outcome of that?
Yeah.
And if there's and then to put it like another layer on top of, there's a trend where I've been tired and I haven't said, I haven't engaged as much, then I feel guilty if I say no. And there's just it's such an internal struggle all the time for me when I'm low energy. Now, the times that I've felt better physically and have more energy, it's a lot easier. There isn't that struggle, but especially this year has been super stressful.
Yeah.
And I've dealt with some just mental health and physical health challenges from that, as most people have. And I've said no a lot more than I've said yes. And it's not like I think that I'm necessarily damaging them or they're going to love me any less. But there's one of the things that makes parenting so challenging is that even if you realize it or not consciously, there's this unconscious knowing that each time they sit on your lap or you read them a book or you play catch or you pick them up and hold them, that could be the last time that they do that. And I don't necessarily mean like from a grim, they're going to die or something, but like they grow and they evolve and things they were interested in at one stage are not interested in anymore.
Yeah.
And you never really know when that's going to happen.
Right.
And so there's this, and it's such a like conflicting set of emotions of you want to see them grow and you want to see them like step into their own person. And at the same time, like you're still holding on because you've become so attached to all of the cuddles and all of the cute little things that they say as they're learning how to pronounce things and they don't understand what things mean. And you're pushing and pulling them back at the same time. And it's just so weird. It's such a vulnerable place to be. And it's easy as a 5 to want to disengage from that. And the times when I am at my unhealthiest, that's the struggle for me, is like pulling away in those moments because it's hard.
Yeah. Okay. So I think about, like, you kind of sort of touched on this a minute ago, but I think a lot about how, when I think about parenting as someone who's not a parent, I think of how every single person that exists carries with them the baggage of the character flaws and mistakes of their parents and the things that their parents pass on to them of their own insecurities and their own. It's like your kids become in some ways the result of your insecurities and your weaknesses and your shortcomings, right?
Yeah.
As a 5, I would imagine that you would, it would be hard not to think through what things you're instilling in them that are that they're gonna carry on that are your negative traits or your negative things or shortcomings. Do you ever think about that? And if have you thought of any? have you noticed anything along the way?
Yeah. So I'll answer the second question first. So I've definitely noticed when you're a new parent, everything is scary.
Yeah.
You don't know what's okay and what's not okay. And this is a constant like, don't touch that. Don't go over there, and as they're exploring their boundaries, it can be really easy to set some really constricting constraints. And I've noticed that in our oldest, especially, some of those anxieties have come out. I don't know if it's, and that's the thing is like, I don't know if it's like something that would have developed naturally anyway, just based on the type of person that he is, or if the whole nature versus nurture thing, it's hard to tell.
Right.
But on the other side of it, yeah, that's something that you think through as a parent. If I hadn't experienced the growth I've had over the last few years, it would probably be a much bigger deal. I think that I have been able to let it go for the most part because it's just inevitable. We have such little control as individuals. We have such less control over the outcomes for the people we're responsible for.
Yeah.
And the best that we can do is in these early years, show them as much love and show them that we're on their side as we can and try to teach them as much good things as we can teach them. And then like the way I approach it, at least, is I think through like eventually they're going to grow up and be making their own decisions. How can I, through whatever this moment is, how can I help put in the building blocks for them to be able to make better decisions growing up? And then you just kind of let them go like over time. Like I don't spend a lot of time worrying about that because I've just sort of accepted that yes, we can carry baggage from our families, but at a certain point we reach a certain age or a certain point in our lives where we're still choosing to hold on to it. And then that's a choice that we continue to make as adults, and we can choose to hold on and we can choose to let go. And that is up to them. That's not up to me. There's nothing I can do to make that choice for them, nor would I want to, because that's part of the process of like growing. And so,
right.
Yeah, I don't worry too much about that. I don't know if that's a 5 thing or if that's just like me being me, but
well, and I think I think it's a wing thing, right? Like,
it's probably
I have
a wing thing.
Anxious wing. So
that's true.
My anxiety gets the best of me in that way. I think that
I am much more willing to, or much more, what's the word? I have no problem just like living in the abyss because that's the
And I'm just like, no, where's the shore?
I accept that tension and I kind of like thrive on it.
Yeah, I feel like. Well, and I've thought about a lot about how my parents, the way that they raised my brother and I, has a lot to do with them overcorrecting from how their parents treated them. Sure. And so it's like the opposite thing, right? So like my dad's dad never gave them gifts. He never did anything nice for them. So my dad was very willing to do nice things for us or give us like more lavish gifts when we were kids or whatever, which in turn made us in some ways very much spoiled little brats, right? And that's obviously a super like basic and kind of rudimentary example, but it does kind of it's always been really interesting to me. Even if you have no control over it, I would have a hard time not at least attempting to observe the things that I'm like, oh yeah, that definitely is where I'm getting that from my parents and trying to overcorrect right now, and I have no idea what that's going to do to them,
Yeah, and I think very rarely does any one moment really define them as a person.
Sure.
And so there's always a constant observing and course correcting, and like I maybe get 25% of it right. It's just failing a lot until you start to find things that work. It's really all it is. Yeah. Because humans are like, parenting is just so complex, and there's no one right way to parent because every parent's different. Every kid is different. Every couple is different. Every set of siblings is different. Every environment is different. And then you bring in all of the like baggage from 2 sets of families, And
Right.
it's just so complex that you'll drive yourself nuts trying to sort through all of it and try to control it. And so the way that I look at it is, I think I'm a better parent than my parents were. And I think they're a better parent than their parents were. And I think they're a better parent than their parents were. And I hope that my kids are a better parent than I am.
Right.
And that's, if they're a better parent than I am, if they choose to be a parent, I mean, I consider that a win. And then their kids be better parents. I mean, it's just, if we can, it's about progress, not perfection.
Mhm.
And so if we can push forward and work together to make sure that the next generation is better equipped, has better perspective, then you got to let go of all the rest of that stuff.
Okay. I'll accept that answer.
One of the hardest parts for me as an Enneagram 5 to parent was just being able to communicate with my son. So I found it harder as he was littler and more of a baby and he couldn't talk. I found it more difficult to like connect with him and communicate with him. And I found that as he got older and he learned to talk more and we could have conversations, that it was more enjoyable and I was able to connect with him better in that sense. And one of the best parts is just being able to, if he has a question about how something works, just to, unpack it and explain in detail, whether he cares or not specifically about the detail, just being able to explain to him how something works and the questions he asks is one of the best parts. And just seeing his light bulbs go off when something makes sense to him is really rewarding for me. So that's probably one of the best parts about being an Enneagram 5 as a parent.
Okay, so I have a question that's going to sound more harsh than I mean for it to.
Shocking.
Have you did you at any point before you had kids, or maybe even during, I don't know if you ever had this thought, but I've struggled a lot with, in my process of trying to decide if I don't know what I'm trying to say, but like not child worthy. There's a, what's that, like when a ship is like seaworthy? That's what I'm thinking of in that term. If I
Love it.
if I'm willing to have children, one of the questions that I ask myself, and I'm wondering if it ever crossed your mind, is if you think environmentally, is it irresponsible to have children?
You mean environmentally, as in the state of the world?
That's a different question. No, just the footprint that you leave in the environment. That's a question that legitimately people ask, and that fives ask a lot.
Yeah,
it's a purely logical side, right? Like
Sure.
there's no emotion at all to that question, but it is a question I see asked a lot on the internet, and also one that I have asked myself, and that Madison and I have talked about. Like, is it even responsible? We have, the world and our country is overpopulated. We're running out of resources. Like, no, you don't think so?
No, not from the data that I've looked at and the things that I've read. I think the overpopulation is a myth. Like, things are slowing down, and actually, the scarier thing is that population is declining. Like birth rates are declining.
People are choosing not to have children more often.
and that we don't know.
That's true. Maybe that was a projection years ago.
We don't know what so just there are different ways to look at this, right? So there's like there's an environmental aspect, there's like an economic aspect, there's probably a moral aspect. Just looking at the economics, because I've kind of been nerding out on economic stuff the last several months.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily know what it looks like to have an economy that's based on population decline. Our economies have been built on just a booming population. And so there's a certain amount of productivity that comes with each generation getting bigger and bigger and the population growing. When you start to decline in like the workforce, and I'm not economist, so probably there are probably people listening like, this dude has no idea what he's talking about. But
yeah.
But the stuff that I've watched and read, like we don't know what that looks like, and it's a little bit scary. It can be a little bit scary when we don't have enough people to do the jobs that we need to do. And so from that perspective, I don't get caught up too much in that sort of thing, because the way that I look at having kids now, especially, is that having a child is sort of your own personal hope for the world. And so I get, especially if you're cynical or pessimist I understand the dilemma, and I've had to work through some of that. But I think that having a kid is saying, I believe that there is a future and that the future can be better. Because if I didn't believe that, then I wouldn't put someone out to that future, right? And at least consciously choosing that. And so here's my part that I can play in that. I can't change these big, huge problems in the world, but I can make sure that there are 3 people in the world that are going to make better decisions than maybe their parents made or their parents made or whatever. And so I can't, like, that's my way of helping to make the future better, is I can try to raise my kids in a way that they make their world better.
Well, that answers my next question that I had, which was bringing children into a world. Does it force you to have, do you have a choice but to have a positive and optimistic outlook on the future and where the world is going? Because I feel like you like you just said, you kind of default to the positive side.
Well, I mean, you always have a choice, right? You choose the lens that you view the world in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say I've definitely taken a couple steps back on my optimism this year. When the pandemic first started, I was much more optimistic that that it would be an opportunity for the world to come together. And as the months progressed, it just seemed like the opposite was happening, and it just divided the world even more. But I think that this is kind of how change works. This is how progress works. You take 2 steps forwards and 1 step back, and there's always a pendulum swing. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know what the next couple of decades are going to look like. Nobody does. And it's easy to get really cynical about it. And to be honest, most days these days, I am really cynical about it. But I'm starting to get back into that, into a more, as I personally get more into a healthy mindset, I tend to lean more towards the optimistic view.
Sure. New election cycles help that. Helps shift things around, mix things around a little bit. So do you, as a 5, feel that you try to more adequately prepare for your kids' future? Or do you feel like with your 4 wing, you also live in that kind of abyss or tension of just kind of trying your best day to day and seeing where you're going to end up when they're 18?
Yeah, I don't know. This also kind of gets into our Myers-Briggs types, right? Because I'm an INTP and you're an INTJ, and I'm not much of a planner, and you're definitely more of a planner. And
much to my detriment. Really. It's awful.
And much to my detriment, and I'm not a planner. Hopefully, we balance each other out.
Yeah,
I think about the future, but I'm much more focused on the present. Just because there's so many things that I can't control about the future. So I can make decisions now that hopefully will make the future better or make it a little easier.
Right.
But I don't know what that's going to be. So I don't get caught up too much in that.
Yeah. I mean, I was curious because as 5, as generally as 5s, I should say, I don't want to put us in a box, but I feel like I often make decisions based on the type of future or the type of life that I want to live when it comes to things like career paths or passions, hobbies, those kinds of things. How much does having children affect that? I mean, so
a lot.
Yeah, right. So like, do you still think about what's going to make you happy, or is it more about what makes them happy and what makes them have a good life and that kind of stuff? Like, how much does what you want get sacrificed? Because that's a big thing for a 5.
Yeah. Yeah, it's what is our avarice is our big thing. Like, we're greedy.
Yes.
And yeah, that's a great question. So there's a balance that has to happen there, because I don't think you can be a parent and not sacrifice.
Right.
It's inherent.
Not a good parent.
It's inherent. Yeah. I mean, and I say like a parent who actually like is trying. Right.
Yeah.
I don't think you can do that and not sacrifice anything. On the flip side, there are people who use their kids as an excuse to be a martyr.
Right.
And so that's sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, that it's also not healthy for anyone involved. Mm-hmm. And so where I tend to land, and it's not really a place, this is sort of like a dance, right? Where this has been part of my like entrepreneurial journey. there are times where I'm pushing really hard and I'm not spending much time with my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I start to feel that and I don't like it. And so I'll ease off in one place and I'll put more energy into this other place, into my kids. And then I can feel like there are still like stories that will be like your family's holding you back from achieving your true potential or whatever it is, which is just a story. But there is something innate in me that I want to make an impact. I want to create. I want to do certain things. I do have my own personal goals, and so then I'll swing back the other way. And the podcast is a great example of this. This is something that I am choosing to sacrifice a few hours on an evening after they go to bed, where normally I would be spending time with my wife, in order to create something that I think is going to, help other people, or just be something that other people can connect with and get meaning from. And that's just a choice. But I'm also, by choosing to do this, I'm choosing to not do certain other things that are also personal goals. And I think what you're getting at is there is definitely an easy path to resenting being a parent.
Mm-hmm.
There's absolutely. And there are times where I could feel myself flirting with that. But it really is about the stories that you're telling yourself in those moments. Because when I step back, when I feel that and I step back and I'm realizing, no, I'm actually making a choice here. I'm choosing to say no to these things because I'm telling myself right now that in this moment, I have to spend time with my kids. But a lot of times what's happening actually is that I'm scared of this thing over there.
Right.
And so I'm using my kids as an excuse
Yeah.
to stay in my comfort zone. And so it's just this constant just trying to evaluate where I am and the choices that I'm making and the stories that I'm telling myself and make better choices and choose better stories. And there's no perfect balance. There's just like a dance between the things.
Okay. Sounds like a constant war. Sounds exhausting.
Yeah. So that is and it isn't. And this is the thing that I wish I had known. I don't know if I say I wish I had known because it was fun discovering it.
Right.
The thing that we haven't really talked about is answering that question of like, why would anyone do this?
Yeah.
And there's something about, and I can only speak to my experience as a dad, but there's something about having that relationship with my kids that I'm not going to say that it negates the whole energy thing, but it just makes it not really important. One thing that so going back to the newborn phase, because I think this is a great example of the challenges of a 5. I think that's probably the hardest phase. I don't know. I would say, I don't know if it's the hardest phase for everyone, but I think it's the hardest phase for a 5 because it requires so much and you really don't get anything out of it.
Yeah.
I'm going to be real honest. Like I'm probably more than average connected with my newborn quickly. But even that, it's like they don't do anything. Mm-hmm. They don't even acknowledge that you're there. Like they can't, like they don't,
right.
They don't even have a sense of self at that stage.
Right.
And like
no self-awareness.
And so you're literally just like giving up sleep and giving up time and giving up energy and changing poopy diapers and trying to figure out why they're crying and bouncing them on an exercise ball for like 2 hours because they have gas and all of this stuff. And there's really like, you're not getting anything out of that in that moment.
Right.
And it can be exhausting. And it definitely is exhausting for other reasons later on. Like, for example, constantly having to explain things. Like using my words to explain why something is the way that it is, like over and over and over again. I will say most of my kids' vocabulary comes from Amy, not from me, because
it's
just
obvious.
Like constantly talking to them.
Right.
But in the newborn phase, you're not getting anything back. And so it's hard, like that logical part of you is like, this doesn't make any sense. Why am I doing this? What I experienced was, so I knew that for myself, if I didn't lean into that and build the good habits early on, then I was going to really struggle with disengaging as time went on. And so like I was the first to change the diapers. And especially in those early days, like I was changing every diaper that I could. And I was taking every opportunity, even though I was exhausted. I'm like, I tried to make it a habit where it's like, okay, they're crying. I'm gonna pick them up. I'm gonna figure this out. And I was doing all the research and I was trying to, do all the things. And I was leaning into that in a way that was not natural to me, but I was working against what I knew I was trying to set up healthy habits for myself in doing that. Now, what I stumbled upon in that was I didn't realize what I was doing at the time, but what I was doing there was I was laying this foundation of, by showing this creature love and not getting anything in return. I will say I didn't really know what love was till I had kids. And when you put in all of that work and you do all of that, when they do start those little things, like all the tiny little things, becomes so much bigger and so much more rewarding. And that's why you'll, if you're not a parent and you're interacting with a parent and they're like making a big deal out of the dumbest little things, that's why. Yeah. Because they've invested so much in it. And they're like, look, my kid pooped on their own in the potty. Like, and
people don't see the hours every night and all the stuff.
You don't get it. But in doing that, like you're investing yourself into this, and the irony is there's such a joy that comes with that. Like even before our oldest was old enough to interact with me, I found myself after like a month or two of doing this, and I was getting joy from it by taking care of this person that can't take care of themselves and can't give me anything back. And what I was doing is I was falling in love with my kids. And that has been the biggest surprise to me, I think, of being a parent, where even in those hard times, that are draining, I can still get replenished in certain ways that make it like, it's weird. There were times where in the newborn phase where I'm like, I have not gotten any sleep. This kid has been crying for hours. Our first had some really bad colic. And so it was just like, it was rough. And so I'm like, I haven't gotten any rest. And like objectively, I can look at the situation like, this sucks. Like I can look at it and say like, this just sucks, but I don't feel it. It's like, I can acknowledge like, yeah, this sucks, but like, I mean, I'm here and I love this person. Like it's okay. It's okay that it sucks.
Right. Yeah.
It's not like just sort of pretending like it doesn't suck, but it's just like it being okay that it sucks in the moment, because by sucking it kind of like doesn't suck. And it's so weird. It's the best I can explain it.
I would interpret that as like, I feel like, I don't know if this is necessarily a 5 thing, but I feel like it might be that I feel like 5s, because of their ability to separate themselves from the moment, sometimes in a good way, in a positive way or a healthy way, we tend to analyze or assess situations and keep our cool, and also know that this moment won't last forever and can move through those moments in a more balanced and kind of keeping our cool kind of situation, right? So I feel like in some ways, in the healthiest context of taking yourself out of the moment and living in your head, you also get to kind of narrate that moment in your head and tell a positive story and say, this is something that I'm living that I'm going to remember later and I'm going to appreciate it, even though it sucks right now. It doesn't actually suck. And when I look back on this, it's not going to suck in my mind. And I know that. So therefore, this moment has meaning. I think that's what you're trying to say.
Yeah. And there are things that suck and that I don't want them to change.
Yeah.
So like a great example of this is right now I sleep alone in our bed because Amy is with the 3 kids. And it is not a great situation. And we're making progress towards changing that. But every morning, my 2 oldest come in, and they've created this ritual where they flip on all the lights, make sure they're shining in my face as much as possible, and then get in bed and put their cold hands and feet on me to try to wake me up. And I'm like, this is awful.
Yeah.
And the other day, Amy told them like, okay, you guys can't do this to him anymore, because this is terrible, and this is not a good way to wake up. And they didn't come in the last couple of days. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because even though it's like super annoying, it's also, let's be real, it's also kind of funny, and they get such a kick out of it, and they get a kick out of like my overreaction to it.
Sure.
And I don't necessarily enjoy waking up that way, but I also like kind of love it. It's just, it's so weird, man.
It's terrible in the moment, but then at the same time, like it's so meaningful because again, they won't always want to do that.
Yeah.
They won't always want your attention first thing in the morning. So I get that. That makes sense.
I think the best thing about being a 5 parent is how easy it is to be unconventional and eschew traditional parenting wisdom and the advice you get from other people and just go with what feels right, what makes sense, and what works for your kids, and not just be drawn in by what other people are doing. The worst thing about being a 5 parent is how babies and young kids can experience our tendency as 5s to be in our heads as abandonment, because kids are so in their bodies that when we kind of float away into our heads, it feels like we're not present. So as much as I worked on that as a 5 parent, I think that my kids still feel that abandonment at times.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap this thing up. So I'm going to give you a threefold question.
Oh boy.
What would be your advice to, I'm not going to ask of you to answer the question of someone who's in your place now, because that's not fair. But
Okay.
So what would you say to somebody who is, one, considering having kids?
Okay.
Well, and weighing those pros and cons. And two, because I've basically been asking you questions to try to talk people out of having kids. So now it's your chance to really like take it home, right?
You want me to sell them on having kids?
Yeah. So,
well, that's not happening.
What would you say? I don't know. You've had a lot of advice that kind of popped up throughout this because you can't help yourself. So what would you say to people who are about to or considering having kids? What would you say to people who are about to have children?
Mm-hmm.
And then what would you say to people who are new parents that have recently had children and are in that I'm terrified out of my mind, what have I done stage? So you can start with part A of that question.
I'll do that in reverse.
Oh, okay. All right.
So to the new, are we talking specifically to 5s, I guess?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So to
This is the Enneagram 5 podcast.
I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
So to the new 5 parent out there, my advice is it will get better. Just hold on.
Okay.
It is crazy right now. Nothing really makes sense. You're sleep deprived. Your life has been turned upside down. I think one of the biggest challenges in this first phase is it's like half the baby and half you grieving your previous life and trying to adjust to a completely new reality. And I think most people overlook that because that's a process, and it's a necessary process you have to go through. So I would say, hang on, stay in the moment, and lean into the crappy parts, because you're going to look back, and in those early days are the moments that you cherish the most. I remember the first time our oldest walked, and the first time he laughed and things like that. But there are many, many more moments that were the hard moments that I remember more, and I cherish those just as much. And so do your best not to disengage and try to stay there with it.
Yeah.
The other two groups were people who are about to be parents and people who haven't decided? Okay. People who are about to be parents. 5s who are, you've gotten the news. The hammer is dropped.
You got those baby slippers.
You got those baby slippers. I think I would say that try not to think about what's going to happen after the birth or even during the birth at this point. And there's a lot you got to prepare for, and there are things you need to know. I'll say that in my experience, it's mostly just instincts that kicked in, you know, and so all that knowledge was helpful because it helped inform those instincts. But you're not going to remember like 99% of the stuff that you researched beforehand. You're just going to be in the moment and when all this stuff's happening.
I feel like that's a highlighting. If that was on paper, that's a highlight. Like you should be using your highlighter for that line right there.
So what instead you should focus on is where you are right now with your relationship with your significant other, and making the most of the time you have, because this is going to be the last time. It's just going to be the two of you.
Right.
And it's something to celebrate, and there's a little grief that happens, and maybe a lot of grief, and just sit with that, because that process is necessary to prepare you for everything that comes after. And it's something to be grateful for, because I look back at that time and it was one of the most transformative periods in my life, because it caused me to take a step back and reset and reevaluate everything. And that set me on a completely different trajectory for my entire life. And that wouldn't have happened if I just went into planning mode. Like if I just went into, okay, well, we're having a baby, so I've got to prepare for everything, and I've got, I'm going to think about all the stuff. And instead I said, hey, I need to just like stop and figure out how I feel about this, right? Like work through why I feel the way that I feel about it. And especially if you just found out at 9, it's actually like 10 months, but normally by the time people find out, it's like 8 or 9 months. Like that's a long time. There's a lot of runway there to start to figure, maybe not as much as you would think, but there's a lot of runway to figure it out. And you will. Okay. So the 5 out there who doesn't know if they want kids or not, it's okay if you do, and it's okay if you don't. That's the way that I look at it. So especially if you've decided that you don't want to have kids, I completely understand that decision. Yeah. Like I do. As much, like I said, my life is fuller, and just, I would never trade them for anything. And at the same time, I understand why people don't make that choice. And that's okay. But if you're on the fence, if you're trying to decide, I would guess that really what you're struggling with is the fear associated with how your life would change if it happened. And so name that fear, call it out, and work through that. Only you can make this decision. And at the end of the day, it's going to be okay either way. And like I said, I didn't want kids, and I ended up with kids, and it's one of the best things that's ever happened to me. And I think, but if I hadn't had kids, I can't say what my life would be like. It would definitely be different, but I could have found another path to get to where I am. Maybe there's a quote that I heard. I don't know where it came from, but it's something like, people without kids are happier, and people with kids are more content.
Yeah, I've seen that before.
And so I guess it just really comes down to, what's more important to you? What do you care about? And there's no wrong answer. It's just, you got to make that decision and then be okay with the decision that you make.
Well, a question we haven't answered yet with an entire podcast episode is, can 5s ever truly be happy? So I think maybe you should put all your eggs in the content basket. I will say, as someone who doesn't have kids and has...
let's get your thoughts on all this. I've been talking the entire time. I know that was kind of the point, but...
Right, yeah. So we wanted to interview someone with parents, but I've been collecting my thoughts this entire podcast. So my take on it is that, and this is coming from somebody like I have vehemently, just very passionately not wanted kids for most of my life. And, and a lot of that comes from a lot of things. I think my parents, I saw how much they made my brother and I their entire world. And I was like, I never want to do that, with anything or anyone. I always want to be able to pursue the things that I want to do. And I don't know. I feel like something that I did not expect. There's a couple of different factors, I think, that can change your mind about having kids in general. And I think a couple of those things are just time. So I would say that if you're in a place where you feel like you don't want kids, then maybe it's just not the right, like if you're very passionate, like I definitely don't want kids, I think and it's totally fine if you don't ever want kids. I feel that completely, and I understand that feeling. But I also would say, that the caveat there is maybe right now is the accurate term, and maybe right now is always the answer. And maybe things will change, and you get into a place that you weren't expecting, where you're like, oh, actually, maybe I do want kids. And I think that changes. A lot of factors change that, depending on I was never with another person that I ever wanted to have kids with until now. So that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
I was married before and I knew 100,000% I did not want to have kids with that person. Right. So I was very consistently with people who were not even remotely maternal. Or that great at loving people, including me. So I was like, why would I want to have kids with this person? So part of it was a security factor, I think. I don't think I was ever in a place where I felt safe enough to explore the idea of having kids with somebody, because that's a really big step,
Yeah.
Just like marriage is a lawful step towards connecting yourself with another person, so is having kids. You're eternally connected to that person for the rest of your life, whether you physically stay with them or not. And so I think that's, again, with my 6-wing, that's a big thing. That's a big risk. And so I think that's always been a big thing for me. And I think that's very much influenced how I feel about having kids. And I didn't realize that until I was with somebody that I felt safe enough to actually ask the question in an honest way, do I want to have kids? In the same way that I was like, do I want to get married again? That's also a question that I'd never felt okay with. I felt pressured into getting married before, I think mostly because of my religious background, which is, again, more for another episode that you're terrified of having, but I think it'll be a really good episode.
I'm not terrified. I just don't want to do it.
Name that fear, Josiah. So I think that a lot of that has to do with, I don't know if I ever really wanted to get married before. And I'm only just now coming around to the idea of it again, because I actually am with somebody that I already know I don't want to be with anybody else. I want to be with only this person. So why not get the tax breaks, And then, children are all
Pragmatism
really great.
at its best.
Right. And, children, you get tax breaks with children too. So, no. But I think that a lot of factors, a lot of context is everything. And I think that where I am now, there's a lot of things that play into that. Being so close to you and your children have also softened my heart, which I feel like is to some degree always your long-term plan. You're like, hey kids, go see Uncle Cody. Make sure you're all, play all your best cards, kids.
Hold on, I want to dress you in adorable outfits first.
See if you can get a tear today. And just getting older. I don't know. There's something about too, if you don't, and this is also getting into other episodes. I feel like this episode now needs to come after the religion episode. But if you don't believe in anything happens after death, and you don't believe in God, you don't believe in whatever, if you are a 5 that says what's in front of me is the most real thing that I have, then children are the most real way to live on after you die, and the biggest legacy that you have, right? Like that's, if we're remembered, if the way we live on after we die is by those who love us and remember us, then you're creating more of people who will hopefully love and remember you in a way that it lives on after you die. And that's a really weird way to think about it, but it has crossed my mind.
Well, yeah. And I mean, there is a whole biological component to all of this there is like the naturalist approach of, I only love my kids because of like a biochemical response with
it's
hormones
part of me and all of that.
Yeah. And
it's not untrue. It's not completely untrue.
No, I mean, like, yeah, I get that. I think especially with the 4-wing, that was never enough for me.
Sure.
Because it doesn't really communicate the whole experience.
No. And it's not enough of a reason to do all of the things and go through all the things that you have to go through to have kids.
Yeah.
So I don't think that saying you want to like continue on with your like DNA and your bloodline and make sure that survives is a good enough reason to be like, by the way, you're going to sacrifice the entire life that you thought you were going to have. Like, I don't know. That's not a good argument.
Yeah. Hey, I'm glad that you brought that back up, because I did want to say one more thing about that piece.
Mm-hmm.
In that there's definitely sacrifice, but there's something that you don't get when it's just you or just you and a significant other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's going to be more challenging to go on vacations and travel because
or afford them.
Yeah, or afford them, or just the logistics, and especially when they're young. We haven't really gone on vacation because of many reasons, but that being one of them. But there's also this whole other experience of living, like watching your kids experience certain things for the first time. It's like being able to relive them. And there's something so magical about that. And so it can make all of these other experiences that you're planning to have, like that much more beautiful. And if you can let go of the picture that you have, which is something that I've had to constantly do over and over again, of my own expectations, and let things be what they are, man, like we've had just some amazing experiences by letting our kids be kids and being there with them and watching them take all this stuff in and react. And it's
kind of get to live through them in that way too,
and
right?
so it's
Your
not
inner child and all that.
it's not the same. You are sacrificing what you wanted, what you planned maybe, but it's also different, and it can be a really good different, and it can be better. It might not be better all the time, but it can definitely be even better than what you had imagined. And so that's why going back to like, either way, it's okay.
Right. Yeah. You're just telling it. Both stories are great. You're just telling a different story.
I think the best part about being a 5 and a parent is that children are so curious. They love information just as much as I do, and they're continually asking questions about the world. I never got tired of them asking me why, that why toddler stage, because I love that question. I love answering that question. I love sharing the knowledge with them and sharing the why with them. And so watching them learn and watching them want to learn. And now that mine are a little bit older, in their early teens, they're teaching me information, and it's the best. It's my absolute favorite.
It's a challenge no matter what you do, and trying to come up with that bottom line is going to be something that never really happens. I think that's something that I've gotten used to, the idea of I'm never going to be 100% on board with having kids.
No,
you're never going to be 100% on board with not having kids. Well, I mean, maybe you will, but I don't know. I've never met a person who was like, yeah, no, I'm 100% not having kids, and I've never thought about it. You know what I mean?
I mean, I've met some people like that, and
who've just never thought about having kids.
Well, it's just never been something they've ever wanted to do.
Sure, yeah, not having that parental aspect.
I think that there are people that don't want to be parents, and there are people that shouldn't be parents, and I think that if you're one of those people, like, you know who you are.
Right. And you're not listening to this episode.
Well,
probably.
Yeah, I mean, probably not. Yeah.
This is for the people who are contemplating and wrestling with that thought.
Yeah. And so I would venture to say, like, if you are wrestling, if you are on the fence, then it's something that is a possibility for you, and that you're never going to do like a pro-con list and come out on the side of having kids. You're just not going to do it, because you don't know what it's like until you experience it, and nothing can prepare you for that experience.
Yeah.
And so you've got to make the decision of, is the risk something that is worth me taking and finding out? Am I going to be okay with the not knowing? And only you can make that decision.
Yeah. All right. This sounds like a good place to stop.
Okay.
I think we've said all we can say about it. Do you feel like that?
I mean, I can always say more, but I think it was a great place to stop. Yeah.
All right.
Let's do it.
Cool.
Hey, it's Cody, and I wanted to say thank you for listening to this episode. I also want to give a special thanks to our community members who shared their voice with us. If you enjoyed this episode and you're the type of person who likes helping others, would you do us a favor and share it with other people like you? If you found value in this conversation, they will too. If anything in this conversation has resonated with you, or if you have any further thoughts or questions, I want to invite you to join our community of other people like you and continue the conversation at Enneagram5.com.